Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com. Femi Longe, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Thank you very much, Robert.
It's wonderful to have you here. Just by way of quick introduction, you are the program director at B Trust Builders,
Yep.
which is a foundation that supports Bitcoin open source developers.
Correct.
And I think we're going to have a kind of a general discussion today about Bitcoin adoption,
Yep.
the nature of Bitcoin,
Yep.
the nature of money itself. So maybe we could just start with a very broad question.
Yep.
What is Bitcoin?
Oof. So the way I see Bitcoin as money for the internet age.
Uh-huh.
I see it like money. If you look at what the email was to post, I see Bitcoin as being that to traditional money. So before we had email and the internet, you send a letter. It takes days, in some parts of the world, weeks, to go from one part of the world to the next. Back in the old days, when we didn't even have planes, it took months, years in some cases. With email, you can send a message to someone in Australia from Nigeria or from Ireland or for the US where you are, and they get it instant. I see Bitcoin as that for money and transfer of value. So rather than rely on the banking system to get value from one part of the world to the other and all that traditional infrastructure, Bitcoin is like email for money or for value. So with on traditional layer, average 10 minutes, value gets from one part of the world to the next. With Lightning, it's instant.
Yeah.
And it's uniform money that is not tied to any specific geography. So the way with gold, we didn't have Nigerian gold and American gold or British gold or Brazilian gold. Gold was gold. For traditional currency, you have the US dollars, you have the British pound, you have the Nigerian naira. It's too fragmented and it fragments humanity. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin wherever you are in the world. So I see it as money that shrinks the world, that makes commerce happen faster without without the politics of a single individual state controlling it.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. So we are obviously transitioning from one age into another, from the industrial age into the digital age or the internet age. And so it would stand to reason that our money would change as well. I mean, we had
Absolutely.
our money transformed when we got telecommunication networks, right? We got sort of these ledger entry banks that could just move credits around the world.
Yep.
So makes sense. And the analogy is good too. Bitcoin is money, what email is to mail.
Yeah. I think the difference, and yes, we've had electronic money or we've had a ledger system for a while. The difference with Bitcoin, which for me, I guess is exciting, is even within that traditional electronic system or ledger system of money with moving of credits, you still have gatekeepers.
Mhm,
And you have centers of the world where they don't produce much concrete value. All they do is
mhm,
they are a routing center for money,
yep,
collecting their shares. Places like Singapore, like London.
mhm,
What Bitcoin does, which for me is exciting, because I'm from Nigeria in Africa, which is one of the parts of the world that the gatekeepers like to keep out of the
yep,
system and manage our access. What Bitcoin does is it removes that power for them to manage our access. We don't need
mhm,
to ask them for permission to move value. Neither do we have to ask for permission to get our value back.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Point well taken that intermediaries cause a lot of interference. They
Right.
sort of make the money less usable, right? You
Right.
can't send it as easily as you can an email.
Right.
They also get all of this asymmetric power, like they can censor or seize or freeze or reverse transactions,
Right.
or entire account balances. That makes sense. So if Bitcoin is money for the internet age, then I have to ask you the natural extension to the question, what is Bitcoin? Which is the question that we focus on this show a lot. Uh, what is money?
Oof. So money is a representation of value.
Mhm,
So and value can simply be, I mean, the best way I describe it is I have a need and you have a solution for my need.
mhm,
The solution you're giving me is value.
mhm,
But if you give me that solution, you
mhm,
want something in exchange
mhm,
because it took you some effort or it's going to take you some effort, whether it is the skills that you gained over years or whether it is actual production factory you have that you use to create that value. It took you some effort and some time to create the value that you're giving me to solve the problem that I have.
mhm,
And so you want something back in return. Otherwise, it's charity, which isn't maybe good, but it's not quite sustainable.
mhm,
So you want value back in return. So you give me value to solve my problem. Ideally, I should give you value back to solve your problem. Chances are, though, that I don't have anything right now as a skill or as a product that solves your own problem in the immediate.
mhm,
But also, maybe you don't want a solution to your immediate problem. Maybe you want a solution to your future problem at a time when I won't be there. And so, what money serves as, it serves as a token that represents what we both agree is the value of the solution that you've given me,
mhm,
that you can take with you into a time and place in the future and use it to then purchase what you want to solve a problem that you have.
mhm,
So it's a token that we use to improve our quality of life
mhm.
because walking around living with a problem isn't fun.
Sure.
It's painful. And so we rely on the skills, the services, the goods that other people have created or are creating or have to actually meet the needs that we have.
Mhm,
And what money does is money serves as both a unit that everybody commonly agrees to, but also a store of value that we can then use to improve our quality of life over time and over space and over place.
Hmm. Fascinating. So a representation of value, and you're equating value to solutions, basically, right? Solutions to
Yep.
problems are
Yep.
valuable, almost by
Yep.
definition. And so money is then a token of our agreement as to a
Yep.
specific solution rendered that can be exchanged in the future for other solutions to be rendered, right? So it's
Right.
how we share, I guess, how we distribute the load of problem solving itself.
Right.
Why is this then? What is the relationship between money and commodities? Because obviously, gold is just a metal commodity, yet gold became money.
Yeah.
So, I guess, what's the connection between money and commodities, and further, is Bitcoin a commodity?
So, of course, in creating a token to represent value, we needed to find something that was relatively rare. Because in the past, we've used tokens to represent value that ended up not being rare, and suddenly the market gets flooded. So in the past, we used cowrie shells in some parts of the world. And then some people discovered that, oh, if you traveled 100 kilometers and you go to the sea,
Mm-hmm.
you can suddenly see lots of these cowrie
Mm-hmm.
shells, and you can pack a bag and you can take it back to the village, and suddenly you're the richest guy. Not because you really produced something valuable, but because you made it to the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rarer the metal we could find, or the rarer the material we could find to be this token of representation, um, the easier it was. It was better to use something that was scarce.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you use something that is overabundant, then at some point it loses value.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how, after trying tons of metals, we eventually ended up on gold.
Mm-hmm.
Largely because, one, the amount of gold in the world is relatively rare. There have been multiple attempts, the consistent attempts by people called alchemists
Mm-hmm.
to create gold. You've heard of things like the Philosopher's Stone
Mm-hmm.
that allegedly you could use to create gold. Gold was one of the metals that we couldn't actually make in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And it was where we landed eventually. The amount of gold in the world is limited in supply. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard to get, and you can't create it. If you could create it, then someone could flood the market with it. And that's how we landed on gold, which was good for a while. Of course, part of the challenge was, in its raw form, gold can be big, and you want smaller units of money, which is what led to the then minting of gold.
Mm-hmm.
So where states or different entities could actually cut gold into specific defined shapes and assign value to it. But problem with gold, which we found over time, was because, of course, but depending on what you're purchasing, the amount of the gold could get so large that transporting it becomes cumbersome, but also risky.
Mm-hmm.
And so we moved to, okay, we'll just store the gold in a bank, and we'll use paper representations, of course, at the dawn of the printing press and printing. And we just use a promissory note that says, give this guy value worth X
Mm-hmm.
because he has X amount of gold in the bank. And that's also part of how banking started. The problem, came where, um, unfortunately, when we in human civilization, we build things to solve problems, and they're in existence for so long that we actually forgot what the fundamental problem was that we designed them to
Mm-hmm.
create, to
Right.
solve. And they start building, and they mutate into something that may be beyond what we initially created them for. And that happened with the banking system. So banks at some point, and I guess with the US, well, first was governments that needed resources to fund things that they couldn't afford, like wars, which meant they started scrimping on the gold and cheating citizens on their gold, to the point where they centralized most of the gold in the supply. True to the wars that happened in the last century, which somehow or the other ended up with a lot of the gold in the world and the gold supply in banks in the world being concentrated in the US, until at some point we stopped using gold as the metric for money, and started using the US dollar backed by gold as the center as the metric for money for most countries. Until, of course, 1971, when the US president decided not to even tie the amount of US dollars to any gold in any vault. So we've had all that evolution over time, where we've gone from precious metals through to what we now have as the fiat system, where governments just print currency without tying to any tangible, practical, concrete thing in reality. Of course, along that journey came credit and the idea of you get funds to spend that you haven't earned yet. Initially, with the premise that at some point in the future you would earn it. But I think we've gotten to the stage where there's no pretense that you're even going to earn it in at any point in the future. I was reading yesterday that in the US now, the value of personal credit is now sitting at $1.3 trillion.
Yeah.
That money can't be paid, will never be paid in the
Right.
lifetime of most people that have that credit. So money is evolved away from something that is backed by something concrete, practical, tangible, to whatever we say it is. And that's a dangerous system. Is Bitcoin a commodity? Is Bitcoin money? I think Bitcoin, what it does is it hacks on a number of that initial properties that gold had in its heydays. There's a limited amount of it that is in existence and that will ever be created. So it is scarce and it will be scarce. It can be subdivided. Every Bitcoin there's a subunit of a Bitcoin. Again, something lots of people unfortunately don't realize. 100 million Satoshis make up one Bitcoin, which means you can actually, there are lots of people who never bought Bitcoin because they thought you had to buy one Bitcoin, not realizing you could actually buy the subunit of a Bitcoin. So that subunit means that you can then denominate and quantify things you want to buy to the tiniest of things in Satoshis. What else? It's also money that you can transmit in a world that has shrunk rapidly with the internet. It's money that you can actually transmit from one end of the globe to the other in the blink of an eye, say on the Lightning Network. So yes, Bitcoin has interesting properties that makes it suitable to be money. Is Bitcoin a commodity? Bitcoin is a commodity if we make it. And part of the things we've seen in the evolution of Bitcoin in the 15 years that has been created. In the early days of Bitcoin, part of the conversation is, how do I get a Bitcoin to spend? And the only answer, the one of two answers was either you set up a Bitcoin mine and you mine your Bitcoin. Otherwise, you can buy Bitcoin from people who have already mined Bitcoin. And that led to the dawn of Bitcoin exchanges and cryptocurrency exchanges. And those were first initially access points for people to get Bitcoin. But suddenly what we found was, as the value of Bitcoin grew in comparison to the US dollars, it became an interesting place for speculation. So there are people who were buying Bitcoin with the hope, based on what they've seen and the trends, that the price was going to go up, and so that they can sell at some later point in the future and make a lot of money.
Mm.
And that approach turned Bitcoin into a commodity, into something people are buying with the hope that the price will go up, and selling at points where the price is high enough for them to earn a profit. So at that stage, a lot of the focus moved from Bitcoin as a currency for transaction to Bitcoin as a commodity for speculation.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney.
Interesting. So the scarcity of a commodity, I guess, is reflecting the scarcity of the solutions that the money represents, right? That obviously solutions require time and energy. And so the commodity needs to have some equivalent scarcity. Otherwise, it's not going to function well as money, right? As you said with the seashells,
Yeah,
when they're scarce, they work as money because they reflect time and energy, which is necessary to provide solutions. But when someone makes it to the sea,
correct.
no longer scarce, so it no longer works as money.
Right.
And I guess to do that lens, you could say that the more solutions a market can generate, which is to say the more productive we become, or the more goods and capital we accumulate, the more valuable money becomes, right? Because it's a claim on all those solutions, basically.
Yes. So, I mean, a few things. A commodity doesn't have to be scarce. I mean, you have commodities that are overabundant, right? What just happens is then the value of the commodity drops
Yeah.
as it becomes overabundant. But in terms of is the value of the commodity tied to the value of the goods and services and solutions? Again, it depends on what you consider as value. If we live in a world, if we inhabit a world which is all about exchanging a need for a solution, or yeah, I have a problem, you have a solution to it. But when we make the commodity, the currency itself, a commodity, where I don't have to produce anything, I just need to have enough fiat that I can use to buy Bitcoin at the current price, keep it in storage, hope that there are enough people that are looking for Bitcoin that will force the price to go up. And then I can sell my Bitcoin and I've made a profit. Not from producing anything tangible, but from putting my fiat in Bitcoin and waiting for the price to go up. Then that is not really a transaction of value exchange, so a solution to a problem. Then it's speculation. Then it's speculating on the commodity. Then it is hoping that there are enough people that want this thing that they're willing to pay a higher price for it than what I bought it for. Not because I've really done anything concrete or delivered any specific value, but because there's a market for people that need what I want.
Got it.
I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in the Bitcoin space at the moment. But I think unfortunately, in many ways, that diminishes the potential, and it distracts from the actual transformative potential that the actual currency has if it was performing its function as a currency rather than as a speculation commodity.
Yeah. Yeah. So on commodities themselves, of course, they don't have to be, they can be more or less scarce, right? So as scarcity goes up, price goes up, price or purchasing power, if we're talking about money. And obviously, if you're holding money as savings, you would prefer your money to be quote unquote pricey, which is to say the money has a lot of purchasing power, right? It can be used to buy. That's what Mises makes the point too. It's like no one actually wants any quantity of money. They want a certain amount, a certain height of purchasing power, I think is how he puts it. You want the things that money can render you. You don't
Correct.
want the money itself. You want the purchasing power it gives you. And so there's kind of an incentive trap here because the more purchasing power a particular form of money has, the greater the incentive is to produce more units of that money, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, so money, by that reasoning, money that is difficult to produce actually restrains producers from producing too much of the money, discovering the sea, as you said, and compromising the scarcity of the money, right?
Yeah.
So this, in my mind, that's why gold, that's the explanation basically for why gold became money. It's the commodity that had the supply that was most difficult to produce. And it's also the explanation for why Bitcoin is a perfect savings technology, at least, probably a perfect money, because it's impossible to produce more than 21 million, right? It's the first fixed supply asset. It's probably the only fixed supply asset humans will ever have. And that makes it very, very interesting. And obviously, like, I think this is helpful for people because you can actually reason through it yourself, right? As as more supply comes online, that prices go down. So it stands to reason that when we print dollars, well, the price, quote unquote, the price of dollars or the purchasing power of dollars goes down. So people would naturally prefer the money that was hardest to produce or print.
But I think that's and that makes sense. But I think a lot of that is focusing on and I say in Bitcoin, I say that there is a dichotomy of thoughts at the moment on Bitcoin as a store of value versus Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. And I feel like with that focus on, there's an obsession with Bitcoin as a store of value to the detriment of Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. So everybody's obsessed about the value of Bitcoin going up in comparison to what we currently have, fiat and the US dollars. That there's obsession about the price of it and not enough attention or not enough concentration on how do we actually use it as money to transfer value. I don't believe in that paradigm of buy it and keep it in storage for forever, hodl it because the price is going to the moon. I believe, and the truth is that money flows. Money typically flows from high value to low value. Sorry, from low value to high value. So if you have money and someone has value that you need, then your money flows to where you're going to get the value from. And money achieves its full potential when it is flowing. Money is not a current, it is a commodity you can store. Money should exchange hands. Because that's what oils civilization. Someone says money is the base layer of civilization.
Yeah.
What encourages people to innovate is because money flows to the innovator from the people that the innovator's innovation is serving. When I think about it, there's the image that always comes to mind from the Lord of the Rings books and movies. In one of the parts, there's this dragon called Smaug that is so obsessed with gold and precious things that he lives in a cave, sleeping in this bed of gold. And if you touch one of its gold, it goes gaga and it destroys you.
Mhm.
And yet, down the road from the mountain where Smaug is a small fishing village where people are struggling to survive.
Mm.
What is the value of all that gold in storage that a dragon is sitting on
Mm.
when it could actually be used as a tool to improve quality of life for people in the village down the road?
Mm.
It's the same way I see Bitcoin. We're buying Bitcoin, we're hodling Bitcoin in our cold wallets.
Yeah.
At what point do we forget that Satoshi actually created a peer-to-peer electronic cash system,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the money should actually be moving from one person to the other, as opposed to digital gold? You will not find digital gold anywhere in the Bitcoin white paper,
Mm-hmm.
which is money that you acquire and then you keep in storage.
Yeah.
The value of Bitcoin, we see the full essence of the network of the technology when people can actually use it to actually acquire things that improve their quality of life,
Yeah.
as opposed to acquire it, keep it in storage, hoping one day to convert it back to fiat
Mm-hmm.
when the price is right.
Yeah.
Because that system just centers the fiat system with all the flaws that come with it.
Mm. Yeah, it's point well taken. And my view here is, and this is informed by the economist, I think it's William Jevons,
Mm,
but he was describing the monetization of gold, and that initially gold was just a collectible, right? People like to adorn themselves with it,
mm,
make jewelry, etc. But that created some reservation demand for gold, right? All of a sudden there was demand
mm,
for gold for these
mm,
sort of ornamental or adornment purposes.
mm,
And so that led to gold becoming like transitioning from a collectible into a store of value, and that its purchasing power tended to go up over time.
mm,
So then people started to use it as a savings tool.
mm,
And then people that use the gold as a savings tool, as they've accumulated enough savings in it, eventually they want to spend it. Again, people value the purchasing power of the money, not the money itself. So
mm,
then it naturally transitions again from store of value to a medium of exchange.
mm,
And then finally, once it's spent widely enough, people start to denominate prices in the money and think in terms of the money,
mm,
finally transitioning into a unit of account.
mm.
And so I subscribe to that, and I think Bitcoin's going to naturally go through that
But,
phase. And you see
but,
people
but
already, like people that got Bitcoin at $1, for instance, Bitcoin's whatever 50,000 a day. They have a huge incentive to spend it, whereas people that got it at $49,000 have less of an incentive to do so.
but the gold story didn't end there though, because where that the gold story then transitioned to was the centralization of gold,
Yes, that's a
which
whole
is
other
part of
can of
what then
worms.
led
Yeah.
to fiat.
Yes.
And if we're not careful, what we will get to is the centralization of Bitcoin,
Okay.
where you have whales that own an inordinate amount of the money. And before you know, whales are issuing tokens on Bitcoin based on the Bitcoin that they have centralized.
Yeah.
The mistake we'll make with the opportunity that we've been given is not to fully read the lessons of history with how the fiat system evolved and make the same mistakes on Bitcoin.
Hmm.
I hear people in Bitcoin say, oh, Bitcoin is perfect, Bitcoin solves that. Bitcoin is not. It's a tool that has been created that we need to continue to improve. But in doing those improvements, we need to make sure that we're not repeating the same mistakes that led us to the point where we actually needed Bitcoin in the first place.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Yes. So this takes us back to your earlier description of the emergence of banking, right? So gold lacks portability, right? It's difficult to move across space. One definition of money I really like is it's a tool for moving value or expressing value across space and time.
Right.
So in gold, we had a good tool for moving value across time, but not less so in terms of moving value across space because it's heavy. You have to secure it. There's a huge incentive for people to rob you. You know, it's a physical thing, so they can just take it from you, etc. So we innovate around that by centralizing the custody of gold, and then instead of transacting in physical gold, we transact in basically account debits and credits, right? So it becomes a debt instrument on top of gold, and that's basically what a banknote was, right? The banknote was an IOU for gold, and people would trade it as if it were gold. That leads to the centralization of the custody of gold. That leads to the monopolization of gold. That leads to central banking. That leads to fiat. So Bitcoin, I think, sort of gets around that in that it gives us this instrument for final settlement, and that you can actually move the quote unquote physical Bitcoin, which is really just what UTXOs basically, right? It's just information, even though it's kind of the physical, like you can actually take Bitcoin out of your own self-custody and transfer it to someone else's self-custody without any intermediary.
Yeah.
So you get this gold-like instrument, but it's highly portable, right? Because it's digital.
Yeah.
So my view would be that obviously resists centralization to some extent, or at least there's not as much of an economic advantage to the centralization of Bitcoin. So what are your concerns as it relates to Bitcoin going the fate of gold, let's say?
So if you look at the amount of, I mean, the excitement that trailed the Bitcoin ETFs, or we now have all these institutional investors, retail investors that are now getting into Bitcoin. And look at the volume of Bitcoin that has been acquired by Bitcoin ETFs in the less than a month, or about a month and a bit now, since the ETFs were approved. I mean, Grayscale, last I was checking, Grayscale had more than 400,000 Bitcoin, 450,000 Bitcoin. That centralization starting to me, if I've ever seen it. Because before you know it, 50% of the Bitcoin supply, 60% of the Bitcoin supply, 80% of the Bitcoin supply is suddenly owned by all these juggernauts from the fiat world, juggernaut investors from the fiat world, who are just moving their fiat into Bitcoin. And before you know it, they own enough Bitcoin that they can start making decisions on the network. Yes, you and I will have a few Bitcoin and a few sats, but at what point do they mop up our sats because they give us an offer that we can't refuse? And how do they use that influence how do they use that amount of Bitcoin holding to influence the evolution of the technology and the money? We may say, oh, it's a few years off. It's going to take them a long time for them to be able to get to that. I won't be so quick to dismiss, because that is where we're trending towards at the moment. Because everybody's saying buy Bitcoin and hold it. And I mean, 21 million in supply. If they start exchanging if they start divesting all their fiat investments into Bitcoin, it's 21 million is not so far.
Yeah.
It's not so far at all.
You're concerned then about Bitcoin ETFs?
I'm concerned about obsession I'm concerned that the primary way most people are getting Bitcoin at the moment is an exchange of fiat, and that there's not enough opportunities for people to actually earn Bitcoin and spend Bitcoin without touching fiat. And I'm concerned that with the Bitcoin ETFs, people who've won in the fiat world, who have all this excess fiat, are using it to buy victory in the Bitcoin world. And for me, it defeats the actual purpose of a decentralized money system.
Yeah, that's definitely something to pay attention to. One thing that was brought up recently by one of the guests on the show, Brian Estes, was that if we had a legal status change for Bitcoin, where it were treated as an actual currency rather than as property subject to capital gains, that it would create an incentive for individuals to own it directly, because you could transact in it directly without capital gain, incurring any capital gains taxation. Whereas if you owned it in a Bitcoin ETF, you would still be subject to capital gains. So is that like, I don't know, I'd like to hear your views on that, and what other opinions do you have about what we can do to make Bitcoin less vulnerable to centralization?
I completely agree with that. I think, and if you look at, I mean, I'm from Nigeria, I'm seeing the policies that our central bank is having on Bitcoin. And if you look at most of the policies governments have on Bitcoin, they're treating Bitcoin as a digital asset or a virtual asset. So it's not a currency, it's a commodity. It's not a legal tender. It's not something you spend. It's something you keep as an investment asset. And that is a completely different paradigm for people when they look at it. They don't see it as money that people are using to exchange for value. They see it as something that people are diversifying their portfolio and buying. But what we need to see it as is as money that I can use in exchange for goods and services that I need. I'll give the example in Nigeria, where over the last 10 years, it's been extremely hard to get access to foreign exchange for international transactions. A lot largely because of corruption in the central bank. And so you have all these legitimate businessmen who want to import things into the country, who just cannot get foreign exchange to pay their foreign suppliers outside the country. And then Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies become a means to actually make that payment. So all he does is he takes his local fiat currency, sends it to a broker. The broker goes on the peer-to-peer market, exchanges that local fiat for Bitcoin or USDT, either send it to the guy in China who is buying from, if the guy accepts Bitcoin. If he doesn't accept Bitcoin, he sends it to another broker in China who's part of the network. And that person over there converts it back to yuan or to US dollars and pays the supplier. That is the currency being used for cross-border settlement. That is not investment. It is not speculation. It is simply using money to buy value from a different place and taking advantage of the ability to move Bitcoin over space and time without asking for permission from the traditional banking system. And so you don't have to convince that guy about Bitcoin. He has a problem. If he doesn't get the money to the supplier by tomorrow, he's going to lose $1 million on the deal. You don't need to convince him to buy Bitcoin, and he's not buying it for the price to go up for him to make money. He's buying it as a way to solve a real problem he has in his traditional business. For me, it needs to be the same way that we are looking at this as currency that we can use to solve real problems that real human beings have in settlement and in payments. Until we actually start to understand who those human beings are and what those problems are, that they're having and how we can use Bitcoin as a tool for that, then we're just joining the speculation hype. I strongly believe that what scales Bitcoin, and I also don't agree that it is far down the line. I think it's only as far down the line as people in the Bitcoin ecosystem are willing to embrace it and innovate with it in mind. I strongly believe what scales Bitcoin adoption is utility, but I also strongly believe that that utility comes when any human being on this planet with the skills that they already have a million and one ways in which they can earn Bitcoin, not simply by buying it with fiat. So if you're a plumber, you do your plumbing, you get paid in Bitcoin, and you have multiple ways in which you can do that. If you're a trainer, if you're an artist, if you're a dancer, you can do everything you do. If you're a driver, you can do whatever you do and get paid in Bitcoin without having to learn currency trading. But also that we also create an infinite number of places where people can spend their Bitcoin without having to convert it to fiat. At the moment, we treat Bitcoin like a savings technology or an investment speculation technology. So you do whatever you do and you earn fiat, then you convert it to Bitcoin. And then when you need to spend money on stuff to improve your quality of life, you convert it back to fiat and then you spend. The problem is that system, the current system we have, still centers fiat. Because for most people, how they earn and how they spend to improve their quality of life is the center of their life. If they're still doing that in fiat, then fiat is at the center. We need to get to a stage where fiat is not a part of the equation anymore. Where the million and one ways you can earn fiat right now, you can also use that to earn Bitcoin. Where the million and one places where you can spend your fiat right now, you can also spend your Bitcoin. And for me, the way we get there is circular economies, but for me, circular economies are not scalable. The way we get there are by mainstreaming. If Bitcoin is the currency for the digital age, then every digital platform through which people earn or spend should have Bitcoin as a currency alternative. Or how I see it, if you look at the average person's day from when they wake up in the morning to when they go to bed at night, every single touch point of their day where they interact with money, how do we make Bitcoin a payment option, a spending option? So if he wakes up in the morning, he wants to get his coffee, can he pay in Bitcoin? If he wants to take his Uber to work, can he pay in Bitcoin? If he's at work and is delivering a service to a client as a freelancer, can he get paid in Bitcoin? He goes on Upwork and gets a gig, can he get paid in Bitcoin? He wants to buy flowers for his wife, can he get paid in Bitcoin? He wants to go to the gym in the evening, can he get paid in Bitcoin? Because that's what money is, the one thing that humans have created that the average human touches at least one time or the other in the day. How do we make Bitcoin an option for each of these? And for me, part of a hack to it would be to find every single platform where people earn or spend on the internet and have them integrate Bitcoin as a payment option. So if you go to Udemy, for example, the skill sharing platform, where people create courses and sell courses. If I was a course creator on Udemy, can I have the option to either denominate my course in Bitcoin or in fiat? And can I choose whether I want to get paid for my course in Bitcoin or in fiat? How do we get Udemy to integrate that as a payment option? If I'm a craft maker who sells on Etsy, I make my beads, I make my clothes, I make the shoes, I sell on Etsy. How do I charge in Bitcoin? So that Bitcoin is not just something that you exchange your fiat money for. It's something you actually get paid directly for in the websites that you already use. Yes, we can create an Uber clone that accepts Bitcoin or an Etsy clone that accepts Bitcoin. The problem they will get is the ability to actually scale and get network effects and get the number of customers that those mainstream platforms already have and already serve. How do we get those mainstream platforms to actually integrate Bitcoin as a payment option? For me, that's the killer solution that more innovation needs to be going to in Bitcoin. At the moment, I say this, the majority of innovation I've seen in the 2 years I've been in Bitcoin, the majority of solutions I've seen, applications I've seen in Bitcoin are either wallet or exchange, wallet or exchange, wallet or exchange. A tool for people to convert their fiat to Bitcoin exchange, or a tool for them to store their Bitcoin after they've converted their fiat to Bitcoin, a wallet. But that's not, but how many more multi-sig wallets do we have or do we need? How do we start looking at getting Bitcoin in the places where human beings already are? How do we look at making Bitcoin actually more human-friendly and user-friendly in a way that real people can engage with it without feeling like they have to go get a master's degree or a PhD? A lot of the times when we sell Bitcoin, when we talk about Bitcoin, there's a lot of focus on very complex concepts that the average human being doesn't have the time or the energy for. If we really want this money to actually achieve its potential, we need to start thinking more from a human-centered standpoint, from the point of view of the people that should be engaging with this thing as money.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're laying out, I guess, a vision for how we mainstream Bitcoin by getting large scale digital applications of all kinds to let us earn, spend, use Bitcoin. So that would make a lot of sense, obviously. It would drive a lot of demand for use of Bitcoin, which would therefore drive price and attention, et cetera, et cetera. What are the incentives for these large scale digital platforms or marketplaces to integrate Bitcoin? Like, is this just a matter of education? Are there obvious material incentives for, let's say, an Uber or a Coursera? I think were a couple that you named to adopt Bitcoin. And if so, what are they?
So if I think about, and we're in a very skilled world right now. A few things. Those big companies are also subject to inflation of their US dollar denominated currency or assets too. So for one, it's opportunity for them to earn in currency that is not getting inflated. That's one. Two, businesses like that have global ambition, that have global scale. Part of things that they also have to do for the creators on their platform is to settle, to pay them. At the moment, creators in a lot of the developing world, in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia, struggle with getting their funding out of those platforms. If you're a Nigerian that's working a remote work, a job, living in Nigeria, it's a hassle getting paid. It's a hassle getting your funds down into the country. So if you had the opportunity to do it in currency that is not going through the banking system, then they create an incentive to actually attract creators from even more places in the world than they currently have footprint.
Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221.
For their investors, again, depending on the platform and where their investors are. I know in Nigeria, for example, a lot of startups, even big scale startups in Nigeria. By the way, Nigeria is going through some heavy hyperinflation with the currency at the moment as we speak. And so if you're a startup founder in Nigeria that's built a startup that has achieved scale, that has investors from all over the world, most of whom invested in the startup in US dollars. But the bulk of your earnings are in Naira, which is a hyperinflating currency at the moment. Suddenly it becomes a nightmare for you, the investor, to get funds from that startup. But also a huge chunk of the value of that startup is just being destroyed, not because of anything the startup has done, but because they are earning in a currency that is hyperinflating. And so if they had the opportunity to actually earn in a currency that is not subject to inflation, it's both a hedge for that startup, but also a hedge for their investors if they needed to get or repatriate any funds from the startup that they've invested in. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I guess it depends obviously on the size, the liquidity profile, the solvency, all of these things of the business. But I think there's a lot of pages that could be taken from the MicroStrategy playbook as well, right? Where you're just using Bitcoin
your reserves.
to,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that makes sense. And they've gone so far recently now. I think I saw Mike tweet the other day that they're calling themselves a Bitcoin development company. So, not only can it transform the balance sheet and financial profile of the business, but it can actually change the technological offering and the solution set of the business.
Absolutely. The other side too, which again, as the system scales, as those big businesses also have to pay suppliers. A lot of their suppliers are also far-flung in different parts of the world. Again, you have the choice. Should we pay the supplier through the traditional banking rails with all these large fees? Should we pay them in Bitcoin with minimal fees? Well, if you are earning Bitcoin, then you don't have to convert your fiat to Bitcoin to pay the supplier. You already have earned it in Bitcoin and you can pay them in Bitcoin. So in an already globalized world where companies have staff that are spread across the world, where they have suppliers that are spread across the world, where they have customers that are spread across the world, over time there is incentives, there are savings that they make, but there's also the store of value hedge of the income that they're making. If a portion of, to start with, a portion of their income is actually coming in this deflating currency.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What are there specific use cases of Bitcoin that you're specifically bullish on that we haven't already mentioned? Or are you just really focused on getting it mainstreamed through these existing digital marketplaces as money, or are there other more niche or specific use cases you have in mind?
So I'm particularly interested and bullish about parts of the world that are traditionally cut out of global trade, that have the opportunity to actually transact without asking for permissions. I'm particularly bullish about Africa. Africa, one continent, 54 countries, 43 currencies. Most of our largest trading partners of the average African countries outside the continent. Because it's next to impossible to trade between ourselves. We still denominate trade between two African countries in US dollars.
Yeah.
which isn't neutral currency. Um, Otherwise, I mean, right now, so a few years ago, we signed the African Free Trade Agreement, which is going to encourage more trade, supposed to encourage more trade across the continent. Of course, we're spending a lot of time now on operationalization, and one of the things that they're trying to build is a settlement system across the different countries to translate between the currencies of different countries.
Mm.
Well, what if we had just one neutral currency that we could denominate a lot of our trading?
Right. Yeah.
And for me, that's where I see Bitcoin having a potential, a strong potential. I see a lot of the use cases, the real currency use cases of Bitcoin may not be in the West right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I intentionally use the word right now because I expect that as there's currently a decoupling of the US dollar standard with things that are happening in Ukraine and all the conversations that are happening with the BRICS. And I feel like in a few years' time, the effect of that decoupling is going to be felt in lots of places in the West.
Mm.
And a lot of the use cases that currently exist in developing countries will start migrating into Western markets.
Mm.
It won't be pretty, but it feels to me like where the world is evolving to. So in the immediate, I'm looking at adoption use cases that actually help countries in the developing world with getting access to markets, with selling, and with getting paid while delivering their services to people at the other end of the planet, or delivering goods to people at the other end of the planet without going through banking systems.
Mm.
I saw an ironic tweet over the weekend, which was from, I think, IMF News, which was, for me, I mean, the source made it more ironic. And it was a tweet about the amount of money that are sent in remittances by people across the world,
Mm.
and how the existing system basically eats the cost of those remittances is absolutely high. And people sending those remittances are losing a lot of funds
Mm.
through remittances. I see that as a huge use case for Bitcoin. I think it was the last year or year before, the African Development Bank said that remittances, diaspora remittances to Africa was $96 billion. A huge chunk of that in fees is going to Western Union and MoneyGram,
Mm-hmm.
all the intermediaries.
Right.
The ability to reduce those fees dramatically, and how we design solutions to make that happen seamlessly, I think is an opportunity.
Mm.
I also see, and I know I mentioned startups before. Part of the challenges that I see a lot of that we may confront when asking startups to actually denominate and do some of their accounting in Bitcoin is being able to navigate legal challenges and accounting requirements if you're also transacting in Bitcoin and fiat.
Mm-hmm.
So I see opportunities for people and companies and startups building interesting tools that make it easy for legal businesses, to custody some of their funds or their reserves in Bitcoin without breaching any laws.
Mm.
I see. So yeah, those are some of the adoption use cases I see.
Mm. Excellent. I want to ask you one last sort of curveball question,
Yep.
and this is going to be quite far afield, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. You mentioned the Philosopher's Stone earlier,
Yep.
which is what the alchemists were pursuing, right? And it was really supposed to be a substance or a tool or a technique that would let alchemists transform lead or base metals into gold,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Now, I was thinking about this recently because I put a tweet up about it, so I'll just read the tweet to you. I wrote that gold can already be artificially produced, but not yet at a cost below its market price. One of the many mind-blowing aspects of Bitcoin is that it functions as a global bounty program for bringing more cost-effective energy sources into production.
Hmm.
How ironic will it be if Bitcoin drives the cost of energy so low that lab-grown gold can be produced below its market price, thereby compromising gold's utility as a reliably scarce money and thus destroying its store of value functionality. I've also, this is from reading Jordan Peterson's work. I've read the Philosopher's Stone described as the incorruptible substance that would serve as an antidote to tyranny. And I find it interesting that Bitcoin, at least its money supply, seems to be incorruptible, right? We can't change the 21 million conceivably. So is it possible that Bitcoin has some of the qualities of the Philosopher's Stone, or perhaps it even is the Philosopher's Stone? If it is this incentive program that lets us compromise the store of value functionality of gold, and if its money supply is actually incorruptible and perhaps therefore an antidote to the tyranny of the state.
I mean, and that's very interesting thoughts. I think when the monetary system got decoupled from gold, formally in 1971, gold became just another commodity. Countries don't tie the amount of credit they're creating to the amount of gold they have in supply. So I think the relevance of gold as a monetary tool, for me, that's already been broken. At the moment, yes, gold still has. I mean, I was talking to a friend, an Indian friend, over in December, and she's talking about how much gold is still used as a part of the dowry in the marriage system in India. So gold has other uses right now as a precious metal, but not necessarily as money or as a money substitute, as much as it did a century ago or a century and a half ago. So I'm not so like Bitcoin decreasing the cost of producing gold to the point where it becomes philosopher's stone is interesting, but I think gold lost that power that it had a long time ago. So I don't see gold as if this was a boxing contest for heavyweight money of the world, I wouldn't see gold as a contender.
Interesting.
I see Bitcoin as a contender for the fiat system. But and for that, yes, I like the way that Bitcoin maximizes the efficiency of use of energy, which is only going to keep increasing as we go. I like that Bitcoin takes some of the things that a lot of the core functionality that made gold great in its heydays as a money system. But layers on, like you said, layers on that, the strength of being able to move across space very fast, which is the strength of the banking system, or what that banking system network had that kept them at the center of the fiat system. And the Bitcoin network basically substitutes that. So I think Bitcoin, I'm not looking at the matchup of Bitcoin versus gold.
Okay.
I'm looking at matchup of Bitcoin versus the fiat system. And I won't agree that Bitcoin is incorruptible. Yes, you narrow down incorruptible to the money supply side of things, but I think there are many ways in which Bitcoin can be corrupted. And some of them are even in play that Bitcoiners may not even realize. I'm scared of Bitcoin whales. I'll say this upfront. I mean, I work for a fund that was funded by one of the whales, but I'm scared of concentration of so much Bitcoin in so few individual hands, and the amount of influence that those people can have on the evolution of what should be a global resource and a global tool. I'm afraid, I'm a bit worried that in the Bitcoin world that's evolving, we're going to have people who are the winners, largely either because, one, they found Bitcoin very early, or because they were winners in the fiat world and just converted a lot of their fiat into Bitcoin.
Got it.
And I worry about, I mean, we live in a world right now where there's a huge concentration of influence and power on the owners of tech companies, big tech. The amount of influence that Bill Gates has, he may have good intention, but the amount of influence he has on the education system and the healthcare system in Africa through his foundation, for me, is inordinate. The amount of power that Elon Musk has, the amount of power that Jeff Bezos has, that Mark Zuckerberg has, there's so much concentration of power in single individuals that are accountable to no one. And I'm afraid that in the Bitcoin world, inadvertently, we may be moving towards a similar dynamic. I think for me, I worry about what that dynamic portends, because single individuals can have a hunch or a belief of how they believe the world should operate. And because they have all these resources, they can make that the reality,
Yeah.
even if that is actually divorced from the truth. And I think that's the way in which they become Trojan horses in this allegedly better system.
Yeah.
So I don't think Bitcoin is incorruptible. And I think, like I always tell my students, I tell people I work with, Bitcoin is not perfect. If it was perfect, we wouldn't have BIPs, Bitcoin improvement proposals. You don't improve something that is perfect.
Sure.
It has flaws. We keep identifying the flaws and we keep finding fixes to them.
Yeah.
And one of the flaws that is in the system right now is that exchanging your fiat for Bitcoin. Because exchanging your fiat for Bitcoin is bringing the same guys who are running the current system that we don't like, and is crowning them. I mean, people from the Bitcoin ETFs are becoming thought leaders in Bitcoin. And for me, that's something that I'd be very cautious about.
Wise words. We must remain vigilant.
Yep.
Femi, this has been a good conversation. I appreciate your insights, and yeah, very excited about where Bitcoin is headed, but there are definitely challenges in front of us.
Absolutely.
Where can people find you on the internet?
Easiest place to find me is on Twitter. It's at Femi Longe. That's at FEMILONGE. Or LinkedIn, Femi Longe.
Fantastic. We'll link to that in the show notes. And thank you again for doing this.
Thank you so much for inviting me.